Order. Order. Lynn Brown to move the motion.
I'm grateful, Mr Evans. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. 9 young lives have been lost to violent crime in West Ham since 2017. 9 teenagers, young adults with their whole lives ahead of them, needlessly, tragically stolen from us. 9 lost children who are mourned by their families every single day. Although there has been relative calm in West Ham this summer compared to last, the reason for this spike in violence still haunts our communities and our streets. County lines, as we know, is organised crime. It's adults grooming our children, mostly our young boys, and sending them off to deliver and sell drugs all over the country. These people have created a cruelly efficient business model to distribute and sell drugs, using our children as expendable, cheap labour to enable large profits. It's a cycle of grooming, it's a cycle of abuse, it's a cycle of exploitation that has become an industry. The children are living terrifying existences, witnessing depravity and violence almost day to day. It's a modern-day version, if you like, of sending children up chimneys. They are disposable children. They're making big profits for the criminals who control and exploit them. And I know that the Minister knows this. Indeed, I've had several conversations with the government about these issues over the past year. And I'm sure that the Minister will tell me that losing 21,000 police officers and the fact that the Metropolitan Police Service has lost more funding per person than any other force in the country has nothing whatsoever to do with it. However, as I understand, we have completely failed to identify, arrest, charge and prosecute those at the top of these organisations, those who are making a small fortune pimping our children as drug mules and reaping a good living from the destruction of our children's lives. I know the police are doing their best, and I hope that the County Lines Coordination Centre that's opened this week is going to help. There have been almost 100 arrests in Newham of these young drug dealers in the past year, those who laughingly call themselves elders. But we do not consider them and I know that they consider themselves not to be on the bottom rung of the gang hierarchy, but they are not those who are in control of the organisation. So I and the people that I represent, we want to know that there's more headway in our fight against organised crime, that we're going to get those further up the food chain, and those who are controlling organisations, controlling children and reaping substantial economics are going to be caught. And I'm happy to take a confidential briefing from the Minister on this, because I'm not interested in party political points, but I do want reassurances that those responsible for the creation and the running of this sickening business are in our collective sights and will soon be serving very hefty prison sentences. Because I absolutely hold them accountable for the deaths in my community, for the premature and heartless deaths of many of our young children, regardless who finally pulled that trigger or wielded that knife. So this is my first ask. I want to know that we are putting money into locating, charging and throwing the book at those responsible at the very top of these organisations. And I want assurances that we are closing in on them and that they will soon be languishing at Her Majesty's pleasure, all assets seized. My second ask is about providing our children with resilience against the grooming techniques of these criminals and their minions. I know many of us talk about the value of youth clubs and supported play opportunities, about using sport to divert children from crime. It's not that we believe that the provision of a table tennis table per se will divert a child from the wrong path. It's the professional adult that accompanies the table tennis table that our children can relate to and confide in, and offer insights and strategies for dealing with the groomers and the gangs, and help our children navigate the minefield that is their lives. They need to know how to say no. They need to be given the skills, the tools to resist the manipulation of the groomers. And that takes resources. And I know the Home Office can't provide all the resources on its own. But crime prevention and victim support funding does have a vital role to play in filling these gaps in the short time. I think also that we need to develop a joined-up strategic safeguarding response to the criminal exploitation of young people, with schools, social services, community groups and detached youth workers all playing their part. Teachers, parents, as well as police officers and social workers need to understand the real threat of exploitation and grooming by organised criminals and what is in their power to do to stop it. I will.
Lady's making some excellent points on this. Is she aware of the work of Scotland's Violence Reduction Unit, which took a multi-agency approach to young people who were offending and at risk of offending in order to divert them to more productive activities, and the success that has come from that, seen in the reduction of youth offending in Scotland?
I thank the Honourable Lady for that. I certainly do think that the only way forward is a multi-agency approach, and I hesitate to say that the coordinating role should be placed at local government's door, given the swinging cuts it's absorbing. But there is already a legal well-being framework that this work could fall under. So I think the Home Office has that. I think the Home Office has the responsibility to demand such strategies from local government and strategic partners to ensure that they are in place and that there are resources to provide for them. So that's my second ask, a strategy and the necessary investment in services that provides resilience for children. I humbly suggest that professional youth and play workers are essential to this activity. My third ask is around training for those already in the field who may not yet understand the full malignancy of the beast that we are dealing with and how it cleverly manipulates our stretched services and staff to keep a child within their clutches. My constituent, I'm going to call her Deepa, was increasingly concerned about her son. He had fallen in with a bad crowd at school, though she didn't know it, and she knew he was slipping away from her. His best friend had been excluded from school for drug-related activities, but she didn't know. Alarm bells should have been rung at the school when Deepa told them that her son was starting to spend more time away from home without any explanation. Simply going missing, sometimes for days at a time. He had clothes and a phone that she hadn't provided, that he had no resources to pay for. And he was yet another child being groomed, drawn into criminal activity, vulnerable to violence, and I'm sorry to say that 2 years on, that's still the case. Deepa raised her concerns at school, but the groomers are really very clever. They know how to manipulate the system. Her son told the school that parenting was the problem. She was too strict. He hinted at abuse, and that was it. Not only could Deepa not get any information or help from the school or social services once the allegations were made, but she was put under investigation. His absences were placed at her door. They were her fault. It's clear that the social workers, the school involved, simply did not understand the nature of the crime or the criminals that they were dealing with. Deepa and her son sadly have also been let down by a charity paid for by public funds to provide mentoring for a boy, to do intensive work with him to help him exit the gang. He was up for it. Things had happened that absolutely terrified him. Boys he knew were dead or injured. But this charity was only paid for 3 sessions, and he needed more. Things escalated. He needed help. He phoned them, wanting to talk to his mentors, absolutely desperate. But they didn't respond. They'd done their 3 sessions. They had no more money to others. Deepa wanted to pay for sessions herself, but she couldn't. Way too expensive. So the window she had to exit her boy from a gang is now likely closed because she didn't have access to the funding available to the services that she needed. But think how much more expensive it's going to be to put that child into custody, because that's where it's going, and to fund reoffending over the years to come. The Minister must know it's a false economy. It's going to be another life wasted. So ask number 3 effective, up-to-date training for professionals who will be coming face-to-face with the strategies that the criminals employ, and providing those professionals with the resources they need to fund effectual treatments and techniques to get our children from the clutches of these criminal gangs. But as the Minister will know, in order to catch these criminals, we need to have information. Those with information in the midst or at the edge of the gangs live in absolute fear, convinced that we, the state, cannot or will not protect them. Our children have no trust whatsoever in the systems that we have created, so they don't engage. If we're going to get the information we need, we're going to need to find new ways for our children and our communities to report to us. And frankly, as the Minister probably knows, Crime Stoppers is simply not trusted. My young constituents absolutely believe that Crime Stoppers calls are traced by the police and the callers are being attacked as snitches as a result. There is no doubt in their mind that Crime Stoppers is not safe and that the police will arrive at their doorstep should they phone it. It doesn't matter if that's real or not. The reality is that's what they believe. So that's ask number 4. I think we need a trusted third-party system, reporting system that will pass information on with absolutely all identifiable details removed. Callers have to know they can't or won't be called or visited by officers and that nothing will happen to target them as a result of them providing us with information. But information isn't just about initial reports. We also need more people to feel safe acting as witnesses. Better protection and care for witnesses is ask number 5. Darren is one of those affected. Darren's house was attacked by armed gang members because of rumours about snitching. His neighbour's door was shot through 3 times. It's a wonder no one was hurt. And yet 3 months later, Darren still had nowhere to move, afraid to leave his home and under the constant threat of another attack. Maybe Darren was helping the police, maybe it was just a vicious rumour, but the effect of the failure to protect and move him is the same, because stories like Darren's are known in my community and they erode trust. Constituents who have information, children who want to break out of their exploitative relationships with a gang, are too afraid to do so because this is what happens to them. Witnesses, as the Minister knows, have done amazingly brave things by coming forward. They deserve our greatest respect, our protection and our help to give them a fresh and new start. But far too many of them get the exact opposite. And that's what happened to Ashley. Ashley's 16 and he and his dad is Nathan. Ashley did an amazing brave thing. He gave evidence in a murder trial against a criminal gang member. He has personally experienced very serious violence and has been threatened with deaths many, many times because of his actions in providing the police with information and standing up and testifying at court. The continuing danger to Ashley's life is really clear, and so he's been given a new identity and is relocating with his father, Nathan. It's reassuring that this basic protection was offered, but I'm sorry to say that it wasn't followed through. Ashley and Nathan have been so badly let down. Before his son gave evidence, Nathan had a regular job. He held a regular tenancy in a housing association home that they had to leave. A stable life of contribution to the community, but in the months after the trial, their situation became the stuff of nightmares. Nathan had to leave his job behind with his name. He is now unemployed. He was left without any income because Ashley and Nathan weren't given the documentation, simple things like ID with their photo IDs with their new names. That left Nathan unable to claim benefits that he's entitled to and that they need right now to support them through this awful, stressful time. Nathan has been repeatedly forced to reveal their situation to job centre counter staff to try to get help. Every single time he does this, the reality of them being exposed is clear. It brings fear and the anxiety that the information that could lead to his son's life being in danger once more. Can I get to the end of the story? Nathan has now accrued over £4,000 of rent arrears. Absolutely not his fault. The system didn't work. It happened because he was stuck for months between landlords, agencies, a local authority, not Newham, who wouldn't talk to other agency, and he was given appalling and incorrect advice. The Housing Association did allocate a new property, but it wasn't nearly fit for human habitation. It had no heating, no furniture, no cooker. It did, on the other hand, contain asbestos. And all the while, Nathan and Ashley were penniless, stressed, awfully anxious, because still Nathan couldn't access his benefits. It came to a head last year. At Christmas, they had no money for food, let alone gifts, no secure home. Nathan was on the brink of returning home to his family in the area. He and Ashley had fled because their lives, and putting their lives at risk from revenge violence. But at least then they would have some food, some comfort, some of the basic support, understanding and respect that they had so little form of. Give way.
I'm sorry to have interrupted. I thought you'd finished that, interrupt her flow. Can I just say to my honourable friend that it's an incredibly important point that she's making now? And does she agree with me that when the Minister responds, he needs to respond very fully to these points, particularly in light of the fact that the government's policy is now to use more children as covert human intelligence sources? And the Minister needs to say something about that, and also to say, answer in full detail my honourable friend. Does she agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that, because, you know, the system is letting young witnesses down. Young witnesses like Ashley and their families, it fails them almost every turn. It puts them at risk. It erodes trust, and that trust is necessary for us to give the information, get the information we need, let alone anything else. Hearing these stories makes people in my community less engaged, less likely to engage with the authorities when they have the information that could help us. And this has to change. So, my fifth ask. Public bodies should have a duty of care placed on them to work together to understand and support families like Ashley and Nathan's, because without their help and cooperation, we won't get the information we need to put an end to the blight of county lines exploitation. I believe that we need a national, dedicated system of caseworkers trained to act as a single point of contact, working with statutory services, a named representative for those under threat, because they've helped us, they've helped the police, they've helped the courts, they're trying to do the right thing. Nathan and Ashley and others like them deserve a genuine path to a secure future after the brave decisions that they have made. On to my sixth ask. Much of this violence is fuelled by social media, so I want to see stronger action against incitement online, whatever form it takes. In recent months, local people have been especially angry about one particular drill music video, which was filmed in my constituency. It's effectively a celebration of gang murder. The rapper brags about killing with knives and guns, attacking people in broad daylight, gloating about having killed one man by name and planning to kill his brother. He mocks other young men for just talking about murder and not acting. All of this filmed by masked men in streets that my constituents recognise because they walk and work and live there every day because their children play there. The murders this video is about may be fictitious, but if you look at the online comments, you quickly see many of the young people believe it's real. They explain the murder references to each other and openly admire the rapper and his group for the supposed killings. The original copy of this video had over 1 million views. I'm just staggered by that. And it was taken down, but other copies have been uploaded since, and one since has had more than 120,000 views already. The technology to automatically remove these copies exists, as the Home Affairs Select Committee has repeatedly pointed out. We just need to understand why it's not being done. The law is possibly unclear about whether videos like this illegally incite violence, but I believe them to be very dangerous. They make the grooming of children easier by glamorising drug dealing and murder as a lucrative and exciting alternative to the hard and unrewarding work they see demonstrated in the lives of their parents. It's being presented as an alternative economic model offered to children and made to look really exciting. These videos don't just glamorise, they also taunt and humiliate rivals. These are young, impulsive teenagers. There's so much pressure pushing them to respond, and the music itself tells them what response is expected. More knife attacks, more children dead. The Home Affairs Select Committee called for a wholesale review of legislation on hate speech, harassment and extremism online to bring the law up to date. And I think it's sorely needed. And a better approach to online incitement should be one of its goals. So that's my 6th ask. My 7th and final ask brings me back to where I started, with the 9 deaths and the trauma caused in my community, and what we can help to make things, to heal things there. After the appalling murder of Sami Sidhom in April, there was an immediate and powerful surge of mutual aid and support in his community of Forest Gate. As I've told the House before, his neighbours rushed to help him and gave him some comfort as he died. They were traumatised and they received so little support. But that trauma isn't just felt by the families, the friends, the schoolmates, the neighbours, although of course they suffered the worst. In Forest Gate, there was a palpable feeling that the community was in crisis after Sami died. It was a cumulative effect, though. It wasn't just because of Sami, but all the other young people who had died the year before, especially CJ, who was just 14, and he was shot in a playground in Forest Gate. I think we need to provide support for whole communities who find themselves traumatised in this way. The strong response I saw in Forest Gate can help local people cope and recover and heal. And community leaders have a really important role, but often they're volunteers. They give their time and their energy freely, and it's simply unfair to expect them to take on all of this without training, resources or professional support. So I think we need a professional response to assist communities with trauma and mental health issues that exist after traumatic incidences, especially that involve young people. And having spoken to people about what they felt would help, I personally would like to see the development of some kind of peripatetic regional mental health team, people who can provide rapid, accessible support for communities after tragic events. So my 7th ask is that the Minister works with the DOH and finds a way to make that happen. I'd be happy to sit and think about him some more with that, or any other minister in the Home Office team. And I know that Marie Gabriel, soon to be CBE and chair of the East London NHS Foundation Trust, is keen to support this as well. It's not just crime. I'm sure all of us can think of other tragic events, some of them not so very far physically away from this building, where such mobile teams like that would have been very helpful. The deaths over the last year have caused so much trauma, so much pain in my constituency, and they've exposed our failures in this place over many years to prevent the rise of county lines, grooming and exploitation, and to give young people the hope and opportunities that would themselves keep them safer. These problems can't all be solved by the Home Office, acting alone. But children are dying in my constituency, across London, across the country, and all of us have an enormous responsibility to act. I believe the Minister could play a very positive role in making sure the cross-departmental connections and strategies we need are created, implemented and sustained. And I would support him in that, and I'm hoping to hear that he's committed to making those happen. And finally, I'd like to put on record my enormous gratitude to a group of women in West Ham whose children have been tragically caught up in the county lines operation. I've learned so much from those women over the past year. They have been so generous and honest with their time. And I hope that today I've done them proud and represented them properly. Thank you.
The question is, that this House has considered the government response to organised crime and young people's safety. So there are 5 people standing, and the wind-ups will start at 3:30, so please do the maths and be fair to one another so you can all get in. Vernon Coker.
Thank you very much, Mr Evans. Can I start by saying my honourable friend finished with a comment saying she hopes she's represented her constituents well, and the women, particular women she referred to. I think anybody watching what she's just said in the way that she's just said it and the obvious depth of feeling will think absolutely she has done her constituents proud. But can I say to her, more than that, she's done the country proud by actually bringing to the attention of this Parliament and bringing the Minister here to answer what is a national crisis. This is not some few people in one part of the country experiencing a particular local difficulty. And the Minister, and I'm pleased the Minister's here, from Wyre, Forest and Preston North, because he will, from all of his experience in his other roles, will know that this is a huge problem that requires government and ministerial action all of the time. And what I want to say to the Minister, he is a Minister of the Crown. He is a representative of our government. He is speaking for the people in response to my honourable friend who spoke for her constituents, but also the country, I think. We've got to do better. You know, we are come here as parliamentarians, and here we are in this beautiful building, and you can go half a mile or a few hundred metres, and there are young people who've been stabbed. You can go to any of our constituencies, and the report that I read that caused me to come in, I'll refer to it in a minute, shows that every single area of the country across this United Kingdom is impacted by slavery, by trafficking, by county lines, and by organised crime who are an enemy within. And it requires, and I know the Minister will take this, he has the power to demand from the system, whether that be police, local authorities, the devolved administrations, all of us, to actually, yes, write reports, yes, discuss what we're going to do, but let's get on top of this.
Will he give way?
Of course.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend giving way. Merseyside, please tell me that community intelligence from the ground is integral to fighting back on this. Now, with the cuts in police officers, 1,000 police officers across Merseyside, unless we tackle the problem of policing, we can't solve this problem.
Well, I agree with that, and you know, I'm a Labour politician, and you know, the cuts in policing, the cuts to local authorities have their own consequences, as we'll refer to, and the Minister will, you know, has to accept the responsibility for that. But I also want to say that however many police we have, however many things were going on, resources were put into local authorities, there has to be a government drive to push them into tackling this as a major priority. I mean, I was astonished. What caused me to come into my honourable friend's debate was that I read this National Crime Agency report of a few months ago. It talks about, it's an intelligence gap. We don't know. It talks about an intelligence gap. I asked a parliamentary question. The Minister, his ministerial colleague says, we don't know. We think there are many thousands. There's an intelligence gap. This was just a few weeks ago. That report was 9-10 months ago, an intelligence gap. This was 2 or 3 weeks ago, an intelligence gap. It's not good enough. And the system won't change unless, Minister, you get your civil servants, you get people in, and you demand that something is done. Otherwise, frankly, even in your constituency, my constituency, all of ours, in Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, all of the regions, we are going to come here again in a few months saying how appalling it is that young people have died on our streets through their involvement in organised crime, on their involvement in county lines. We don't even have the data. And yet we see on our streets what is happening. So, yeah, of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's speaking with great passion. He made the point very, very strongly. I thought this was a phenomenon that was affecting the whole country, and I can just say I completely agree with him. A young man dragged out of his car and stabbed to death and left to die in a garden just 100 metres away from my own home in Cardiff just a few weeks ago, on top of many, many other attacks. This is a problem which is happening across the country, and we simply don't, as he says, have the intelligence needed.
Well, I quite agree with that. And that, to be frank, Mr. Evans, that was what's driven me to come in here. You know, my friend really eloquently went through many of the challenges that there are and the impact it's been on our own constituency. But I just want to feel, as a member of Parliament, in our Parliament, in this democracy of ours, that the system somehow feels the emotion that my honourable friend portrayed, and the Minister, as a human being, as a man, etc., will also feel it. But why doesn't the system respond? You know, people will have different ideas. The honourable member has particular views on drugs policy. You know, and that requires discussion. You know, what is the most effective way of gathering the intelligence? Why can't we even, sometimes, as my honourable friend says, and in all of our constituencies, the young people can't even get a basketball or a football or a kit, you know, or somewhere for people to go and play or something like that. Well, goodness me, we can't even do that. And then we talk about diversion and we write a report, and the next thing we know, there's a 200-page document on the importance of children's services and local authority provision to ensure that young people don't get attracted into crime because there are people working with them on their street. Goodness me, we don't need nearly swore there, Mr. Evans. Sorry. Goodness me. I'll leave it at that. Goodness me. We don't need a report, do we? We must be able to do better. So, data on all of these things. So it's really just to say to the Minister, he'll have his, you know, a very good briefing from the civil service. He'll have a speech prepared, and he'll try and answer the questions as best he can. But what I want to know is, when are we going to actually demonstrate, be able to see in each of our areas that concerted, coordinated effort, both in terms of youth provision, in terms of diversion, in terms of dealing with these organised criminals. And let me finish on this point, Mr. Evans, bearing in mind the point, because that's the main thing I wanted to do. Let me just say this to the Minister as well. The Modern Slavery Act, and it has a clause in it, which means that children who are involved in criminality, if that criminality has been the result of coercion, has been the result of being duped, of the result of violence or threats, or those sorts of things, they are seen as victims and not criminals. And I just say to the Minister, and this is why I wanted to intervene on my honourable friend, many of these young people are victims. They are not criminals. Now, I'm not saying just to make sure I don't get misquoted here, Mr. Evans, I'm not saying that you can't hold people to account. I'm not saying that, you know, if you kill someone, saying sorry is fine. Please don't anybody think that's what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that many of these young people of a very young age are exploited, are frightened, and are terrified into actually doing some of the things that they do. And it's about time the people who were terrified were the organised criminals who are exploiting these young people. Yeah. I'm sick and tired of what my honourable friend said, of where people try and help and work with the police and work with whoever, and though the criminals take it upon themselves to terrify a community. It's not good enough. So I appeal to the Minister, when he leaves this chamber, to go back to his office, to call everybody in and to say we've had one of the most serious debates that I've attended in recent years, organised and put forward by honourable friend. And I am going to, as a personal mission, ensure that the system, instead of writing a report, actually gets on with doing something about what is a national crisis.
Jim Doughty.
Thank you, Mr Evans, and pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I too commend my honourable friend for West Ham, who I think gets set out not only a fantastic action plan, but also with great passion the challenges faced by her own constituents, and indeed the horror stories that we hear from, particularly from London, I think certainly shame the whole country, and indeed, as my honourable friend has just pointed out, really do represent a national crisis. And I think I wanted to start by saying first to re-emphasise that this is a national crisis. This is something that is going on in cities and towns up and down this country, and this is a new phenomenon. This is a level of violence, a level of involvement of young people which we have not seen before. That is borne out in the government's own serious violence strategy. It is borne out in the NCA report. It is borne out in what we've heard from the Home Affairs Committee, and it is borne out in what I am hearing from my own police officers and my own community workers on a weekly basis. And I can say there has been a dramatic and very, very unfortunate shift, certainly in the levels of violence and the levels of grooming and the levels of involvement of young people in this over the last 6 years while I've been Member of Parliament for Cardiff South and Penarth, and one, sadly, that many of us warned was going to take place because of the trends that we saw, because of the cuts that we knew were coming in the police, and because of the cuts that we knew were coming to community services. And the point that was made about youth services, I'll come on to in due course. But unfortunately, I too have a litany of horrendous cases just in the last few months, and I don't want to say that each of them have exactly the same characteristics. They're often complex cases, some of them ongoing. But the case I mentioned, where an individual was dragged out of his car, stabbed to death in the street in Grangetown in Cardiff, left to die in a garden just weeks ago. Just a few months ago, another constituent of mine, Fatah Wassame, stabbed to death in Liverpool, involved in some sort of engagement between Liverpool and Cardiff, showing this is an issue that is crossing cities, not just involving London, but between other cities in the UK. And tragically, in Adamsdown and Splot, just a few months before that, Sean Kelly stabbed to death, also in a drug-related incident involving other individuals. And these are just three of the most serious cases, but there are many, many more to report on that. And that very much sits with the national trend, Mr Evans. The number of police-recorded crimes involving knives or sharp instruments increased by 22% in the year ending December compared with the previous year, continuing that upward trend as we've seen since 2014. A lot of that increase from the Met, but also other areas. Possession of an article with a blade or a point up by 33%. Hospital data also confirming this, dealing with admissions related to stabbings and other incidents up by 7%. Trends involving firearms also up. And these are confirmed and acknowledged by the government strategy. Now, this is not all to do with county lines, but it is a significant part of it. And I think one of the things I just wanted to say, Mr Evans, just be very clear about what we are talking about by county lines, because there are some who don't. I had community workers come to me the other day and say, what do you actually mean by county lines? Just want to read out, just for the record, Mr Evans, the definition the government uses. County lines is a term used to describe gangs and organised criminal networks involved in exporting illegal drugs into one or more importing areas using dedicated mobile phone lines or other forms of deal lines likely to exploit children and vulnerable adults to move and store the drugs of money, and they will often use coercion, intimidation, violence, including sexual violence, Mr Evans, and weapons. And that phenomenon of grooming of young people, the involvement of young people, unfortunately has many of the characteristics, and I've seen this in my own constituency, that we see about the grooming of young people to be involved in terrorism, in extremist behaviour, in other forms of criminal behaviour. It's often the same tactics, the same methods, the same insidious exploitation of often young and vulnerable people. There's a phenomenon that goes on in my local area I've been told about called blessings, where people are given small items, whether it's a pair of trainers, a bit of money, whatever, not asked to do anything initially, Mr Evans, but then they are come back to by people higher up in the system and say, oh, you gave you a pair of trainers, how about you keep an eye on that corner for me, or how about you just transfer this package to so on. And it's that slippery slope, and people get involved in more and more and more dangerous activity. And the government's own strategy itself suggests that the drugs and the county lines phenomenon are very much behind this violent crime rise. And they say themselves there is good evidence these dynamics are a factor in the recent rise in serious violence. Now, the government's own report, and again, I would say this very much bears out what I've seen on the streets of Cardiff myself, new psychoactive substances like spice, and the dealing and violence that comes with the use of spice, the increased involvement of young people, the rise in crack use since 2014, the surge in cocoa-leading cocaine production, and the purity of cocaine that's being imported into the UK from places like Colombia since 2013. And the changing nature of drug markets, which has led to what we're seeing perhaps in that geography, that nationalisation of this problem. The government's own report says one of the most striking findings about the rise in serious violence since 2014, it has not been limited to the main metropolitan areas. And we're seeing drug-selling gangs from major urban areas like London, like Birmingham, like Liverpool, like Manchester, possibly driven by excess supply, perhaps driven by technology, perhaps driven by new opportunities, spreading their networks and then evil networks out to other cities and towns across the UK. And the NCA report very, very clear that the majority of police forces are identifying that the involvement of vulnerable children and vulnerable people is one of the key hallmarks of this county lines activity, and that is a trend of just the last few years. This is something very new, and I think we as government, as local politicians, as agencies also are struggling to catch up with the shifting trends and the shifting changes. And a crucial feature, again acknowledged by the government themselves, that the evidence shows that drug selling gangs now are generally much more violent than the local dealers who had previously controlled markets. Now, my honourable friend spoke very passionately about the importance of multi-agency working. And look, there are no easy answers, Mr Evans, in dealing with these problems, and we often have to have very localised and carefully calibrated responses to deal with local circumstances. But I want to put on record my praise for the group of agencies, certainly locally in Cardiff and the Vale, particularly in Cardiff, in Butetown and Grangetown, our police commissioner, our local police officers, our local council, players, particularly Councillor Linda Thorne, a cabinet member on Cardiff Council, and Councillor Said Ibrahim, who's one of our local councillors in Butetown, himself a former youth worker who worked with many of these young people, who are really trying to get to grips with this problem and bring together all the relevant agencies. And I'm looking forward to meeting them again in the next couple of weeks to discuss the progress that they've made on a number of the strategies in different areas that they're putting forward. And I'm very proud that South Wales Police has a very strong police performance on dealing with violence with injury and all of these issues. But like many other police forces, they are struggling to cope. And I've spoken to individual police officers and senior police officers who are telling me about the strains that they are facing in crime demand and non-crime demand. We all know about the pressures from mental health, we all know the pressures from missing persons. The reality is, and the government can argue about this all they like, the number of police officers on our street has come down substantially in the last few years. The number of community police officers, the number of PCSOs and others. There have been individual areas where we've been able to keep those up. We've got PCSOs funded by the Welsh Government that are doing a fantastic job in our crucial communities. But unless you have those police officers on the ground who have the relationships with the young people, who have the relationships with the other agencies, have the relationships with the family, and crucially, that crucial local intelligence that my honourable friend from Gedling was talking about, we are not going to be able to deal with this problem. And that has been magnified by particular challenges in Cardiff that we do not get capital city funding in the way that Edinburgh, that Belfast and that London get, and yet we are hosting major events. We are putting huge strains on our police force, hosting major events like the UEFA Champions League and the Anthony Joshua fights, all these wonderful things coming to the city. We all love them, they're all great, but that has a knock-on effect on day-to-day policing. Even when sometimes additional money is provided, we then see a knock-on on shift patterns, on holiday time and so on. That has a direct result in the very communities that are facing these problems. And alongside that challenge for police funding, and I'm looking forward to meeting the Police Minister shortly with our Chief Constable Matt Dukes and our Police Commissioner Alan Michael to discuss Cardiff-specific needs, it is the challenge of other services facing cuts. We've done a great job at trying to protect services in Cardiff. We've got a Welsh Labour Council that's doing a fantastic job. But the fact is, unless we have statutory youth services, I know that my honourable friend from Brighton has spoken out strongly on this, unless we have that resourcing going into community youth workers. My father was a youth worker, I've worked with young people. That role outside of school, having those relationships, knowing what is going on in those crucial communities, you know what is going to happen. And we warned of this years ago. We are now seeing it, unfortunately, on the streets of Butetown, Grangetown, Splot and other areas of Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. And lastly, I wanted to re-emphasise what my honourable friend for West Ham said about social media companies. I've spoken a lot about social media companies this week and their responsibilities in a range of cases, ranging from the Lucy McHugh case to terrorism to abuse of public figures. But they are simply not taking their responsibilities seriously when it comes to the dissemination and the sharing of some of this information online that is leading to intimidation exploitation and grooming of young people. I want to highlight particularly some of the challenges I've been told by young people about Instagram, closed Instagram groups where there's the sharing of these music videos, of threats to individuals, closed YouTube videos that are being shared, making threats back and forth, and language that's being used that perhaps you or I wouldn't understand, but it's very, very clear to people of a certain age and a certain disposition that they see either as threatening or encouragement or dragging them into these. And we have to get to grips with this, both as a government, as a parliament, as local representatives. Social media companies have a huge responsibility, and we need to provide the police with the training and the resourcing to be able to treat that cyber world in the same way as the physical world, because there is a direct overlap. We heard yesterday in the Home Affairs Committee the direct overlap between domestic violence, violence against women and girls, and the cyber world and the physical world. Exactly the same thing is going on when it comes to young people, county lines and drug-related violence. Got to get to grip with this. I want to hear from the Minister what he's doing to bring in those social media companies and make sure they adhere to their responsibilities. But again, I praise my honourable friend for her debate. This is a national crisis. There should be more members in this chamber, Mr Evans, and I hope this won't be the last debate on this subject.
This is a very powerful, strong debate. But if everybody now keeps to about 5 minutes, then everybody will get in on equal times. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Evans. First of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for West Ham and just say the constituents in West Ham should be very proud of her. She's done exceptionally well, and well done to you. We've had a form of organised crime for many years in Northern Ireland in the form of prescribed organisations as the UVF and IRA. People fighting for their beliefs in terrorist manners, which was dangerous, harmful to communities, and which will take years to get over. However, thankfully, we have moved away from the troubles but we have worryingly moved towards a form of organised crime that is prevalent in the mainland, which the Honourable Lady and others have referred to. We have young people join organisations, used as drug mules, as pushers, and doing the dirty work of those who won't get their hands dirty and keep their hands off police registered by abusing the trust and the loyalty of young people. I see it at work in my community, and it breaks my heart, Mr Evans, as it does the Honourable Lady and others here who have spoken as well. Illicit tobacco seizures have prevented the loss of £1.25 million in Northern Ireland in revenue. Some £50,000 worth of cash has been seized. We had a seizure in Newtownards on Monday. Thank goodness the seizure was £100,000 of illegal drugs, and local paramilitaries, and as they call themselves, but they're really criminals, involved in that. Detective Sergeant Superintendent Singleton, and I quote this here for the record, for the Paramilitary Crime Task Force said, "We look at these paramilitary organisations as organised crime groups. We see a lot of similarities. The number one commodity for organised crime in Northern Ireland is drugs. 75% of our organised crime groups are involved in drugs, either directly or indirectly. When I say directly, I mean dealing them. When I say indirectly, I mean extorting and taxing people that are involved in the drugs trade. Some of the Republican groups like INNA and Action Against Drugs, we believe, are actively involved in taxing drug dealers. If people don't pay, the victims of paramilitary style attacks, if not murder or attempted murder. You also have the violence and that's associated with drugs, as well as different organised crime groups who compete for their share of the market. That's why we see the likes of paramilitary style attacks, attempted murder, and in some cases very serious violence within our communities. Quite happy to give way.
I thank the member for giving away. I would agree with me that part of the problem, in addition to what we've heard very powerfully throughout the debate, part of the problem is that in some young people's communities there is a glamorisation of activities and they are not open to the actual reality of what happens to them after they get involved, and we need to tackle that in a very coordinated way.
I thank my honourable friend and colleague for that intervention. He's absolutely right. I was just going to touch on that very quickly in my correspondence, and I'm going to speak to today. I have seen too many broken mothers in my office who tell me the same story. Their child was given a freebie. Well, it was a joint or a little tablet, and the next week they're told that they owe for it. They can either pay immediately or the interest will be added. That was £10, can rocket to £50 in a number of days. They then given the option to work off their debt. Just lift the package from the drawer in this house, delivered to that house, just collect the parcel from the other person, leave it in this place. Before these young people who know it, they are heavily embroiled in the crime gang. Their parents are worried sick and wondering how this has happened, how often trying to pay extortionate amounts of money to release their child from the chains, only to have it repeat in 6 months' time again. It makes me sick, Mr Evans, to my stomach to know that crimes have been organised by certain people, and yet it is these young people with no criminal convictions who are used to be their hands and feet, and when the PSNI catch up with them, these young people have a sentence, and those in charge walk away laughing. Organised crime is not glamorous, as my honourable friend said. It's not the stuff of The Sopranos or other TV shows. It's a mechanisation whereby too many of our young people become hooked in drugs, involved in things they don't want to be involved in, and they can't get over. Some are lured with the mottos, with God and Ulster, and are in too deep because they realise it has nothing to do with God and Ulster, but it is about lining the pockets of disgusting men who are too gutless to do their own business but run an empire which targets children and vulnerable people and destroys our community. I met with the local superintendent last week with my constituency office, PPS, to discuss these very issues. I firmly believe we can and must do more here in Century to share intelligence and address this. For the mothers who come into the office pleading to me for the help, for the young people who are too frightened to even make eye contact with myself, who are stripped of the bravado and facing imprisonment, for my community which is crying out for change, we must do more in this place to help our police, to help the community development officers, to help our schools, to protect our children, to reach out. Minister, I know you're having the responsibility directly for Northern Ireland, but you can understand my frustration as we don't have an unfunctioning assembly. But nonetheless, these issues are as apparent in my constituency as they are in others. We have an epidemic of massive proportions, and the lives of more families are destroyed. Some 98,301 crimes recorded by the PSNI in 2017-2018, a rise of 0.3% in the previous year. Crimes are up, officers' numbers are down. We need better police cooperation, more funding for communities, and schools and churches do what they can within the communities. And we need to instil confidence in our young people that there are measures to protect them if they give the information, as the Honourable Lady in her introduction said. There are anonymous ways to give the police information which will get drugs and criminal gangs off our streets. We need to send a message, and it must be strong and effective, and this must be done from the highest level down to affect everyone. Thank you.
Alan Khan.
Thank you, Mr Evans. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to thank my honourable friend for bringing forward this important issue today. And it's a shame there are not more members here in Westminster Hall to reflect the severity of the issue. But that should not detract from exactly how important this is. As she touched on earlier, local communities play a vital role in tackling violent crime through mental health support, offering opportunities and working with authorities. Across the country, violent crime has risen by 16%, while police numbers are at their lowest since records began. Our police and frontline emergency services do some incredible work, but are at times overstretched and under-resourced. This is a national problem. Our government can turn away from the truth as long as they like, but it is a stark reality and it is staring us in the face. Over the last 12 months, there have been a number of violent incidents in Tooting and Earlsfield, including some tragic fatalities. Local residents come to my advice surgeries afraid for their children's lives, afraid that county lines are robbing children of their lives, tearing families apart. As an A&E doctor in St George's Hospital, I have treated teenagers, once full of bravado on the streets, lying there, dying in front of my eyes, with tattoos emblazoned "Born to Die" on their chest. These children crying out for their mothers in their final moments. I have been there with grieving parents who have arrived into the resuscitation room only to see their child die before them. The scream, the echo of that pain, that audible anguish never, ever leaves you. Once heard is never forgotten. And unfortunately, it is a sound we are hearing over and over again on our own doorstep, on our own watch. This has to stop. Minister, I implore you to listen to the arguments today. As a Member of Parliament, I have listened to parents who cannot comprehend what has led their children to die before them. As a parent myself, as many in this room, imagine the thought of holding your dying child in front of you, knowing not that they're dying from some incurable disease, but from something that could be entirely avoidable, from an epidemic that is sweeping our country. These parents cannot understand why they have had to hear that their children have died alone, while they have gone to work, come home to hear that the children that they are raising died alone in their own blood on the street. why the authorities were not there to support them through the grief, why there was no way to prevent this tragedy. Enough is enough. Just 3 weeks ago, I held a violent crime summit in Tooting, my constituency, bringing together the Deputy Mayor of London for Policing, the head of South West London Metropolitan Police, the Chief Executive of Wandsworth Council and local community groups. It is imperative for local organisations who support young people and their families day in, day out, to be able to speak directly to the authorities, to discuss how they can be a force for good and shape the way forward for young people in London and across the country. Only together, along with our communities, can we discuss the root causes of these rise in violence. Only together can we get weapons off our streets. Only together can we decide that this isn't yet just another debate that we have day in, day out about a number of topics here that happen in Westminster, but this is a debate that we are having that, if treated with the respect that it deserves, can truly save lives.
Here, here, here. Well done, sweetheart.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my honourable friend from West Ham who has spoken so movingly and has moved me very close many times. It is such an important issue. And in 2013, the coalition government published their serious and organised crime strategy. Prevention was cited as the key component for the government's plan to end gang and youth violence. And as part of this, they talked about the utilisation of youth workers and youth services, identifying the high-risk individuals and help steer them away from crime. Now, for the danger of being a broken record, it will probably become no surprise to colleagues here that I'm going to talk about what's happened to youth services since then and the problems that it has led to our communities. So despite that plan, the 2016 study, which is the latest figures that we have, say 600 youth centres in our country have closed. 3,500 youth workers, a positive adult influence on these young people, have lost their jobs. And 140,000 places for the most vulnerable young people have been deleted. And these figures are 2 years old, and the cuts have got worse. This crippling effect has led to the collapse of youth services across our country, and, of course, an increase in what we see of exploitation of our young people. To put a figure on it, in 2010, youth services and youth prevention programmes had £1.2 billion spent on them, and last year they had £358 million spent on them. That is a 68% cash terms cut, and in today's money, that is £1 billion ripped out of prevention, the very thing the crime strategy said it needed to focus on. And what, of course, unsurprisingly has happened is a jump in knife crime, 69% up, and now this rise in county lines affecting every corner of our country. Now, Councillor Richard Watts, the chair of the Local Government Association's Children and Young People's Board, recently said that councils must be given the resources they need to stop just picking up the pieces and start to be able to tackle the problem. This typifies the current reactive approach rather than the positive approach that we have. And the reality is this, if this was directly affecting your child, my child, children's of people of influence, buttons would have already been pressed, strings would have been pulled, and rules would have been changed. And the reality is that the children and young people that are affected the most are from the poorest communities, often the most disadvantaged communities, and the communities with the least voice. And so what we see is nice plaudits, but unfortunately inaction.
Yeah.
And that is why we need to see a decent preventative strategy. But not just that. Last year, the government slashed by half youth offending teams' budgets. Now, the principle was that a young person who got into trouble would have professionals to steer them away from that life. And if the Ministry of Justice is cutting in half the amount of money that we are spending there, it is not just that we have cut preventative programmes. What we have done is cut the programmes that pick up the pieces as well. So I ask the Minister to go back and ask his Ministry of Justice colleagues to restore the youth offending budget, to go back and speak to the Minister in charge of youth services and ensure that those services are invested in, and make sure those buttons are pressed, those strings are pulled, and that we make sure no more unnecessary deaths and ruined lives happened on any of our streets in this country. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to speak on behalf of the Scottish National Party. I'd like to put my thanks on record to the member for West Ham for securing this debate. What we've heard today about county lines is undoubtedly alarming. The sheer scale of the problem should give us pause for thought. According to one estimate, and these are estimates, 46,000 children in England and around 4,000 teenagers in London are being exploited. The National Crime Agency, however, notes that an evidence gap means that the true scale of the exploitation remains hidden. There have already been reports highlighting the link between violent drug gangs and the exploitation of vulnerable people in the north east of Scotland, particularly around Aberdeen, Fraserburgh and Peterhead. The experience there has been in line with what has been discussed in this debate, namely the threat or use of violence to exert power with an emphasis on vulnerable young people. In my constituency of Inverclyde, drug deaths have more than doubled over the past decade. The interconnected drug market that exists throughout the UK means it's in all our interest to share best practice on how to combat this disruptive force and to identify where government policy is ineffective. Now, this is a key point because it's precisely our drug policies that have gifted a lucrative market to organised crime gangs who have the money, the power and expertise to thrive in such an environment. The trafficking and exploitation of young people isn't simply an extension of their power. Understandably, we seek vengeance, and we want to see those responsible for the violence and the abuse, those who exploit these vulnerable young kids, we want them locked up. But experience tells us that whenever we incarcerate somebody for dealing, pushing or distributing, there's always somebody in the background who will step forward and fill that person's boots. Neil Woods was an undercover police cop for 14 years. In his book, Good Cop, Bad War, he outlines how he put his life at risk day in, day out, with the aim of locking up drug dealers. Neil reckons his actions locked up people for thousands of years and disrupted the supply of Class A drugs for a few hours. Yesterday there was a meeting here in Committee Room 10. It was very well attended. Unfortunately, better attended than this here today, where are our fellow MPs. But most of the people at yesterday's meeting were serving cops or police and crime commissioners. And there was a common theme repeated through that meeting. The phrase, "We can't arrest our way out of a drugs war." Now that's coming from serving law enforcement agencies throughout the United Kingdom. We need solutions, not retribution. Now I understand this. If one of my kids was installed a tab at a music festival and that tab could kill them, as we've seen time and time again, I'd want to find the person responsible for that. I'd hunt them down and I'd nail them to a wall. That might make me feel good, but it wouldn't stop the distribution. And it wouldn't help the next parent who went through the same agonies I've just been put through. Anyone's Child is an organisation set up by people who have lost loved ones to this drug war. And their stance on this is not one of retribution. Their stance is very simply, we have to change the legal framework, we have to change our drugs policy if we're ever going to make things better. I fully agree with Anyone's Child and with Transform that if we were to regulate the drug market, then we remove one of the financial incentives to enslave young people. This will also enable authorities to identify those children as victims of a modern slavery, rather than criminalising them and driving them further into a criminal underworld. And becoming involved in a life of crime, even unwillingly, these children are learning to become intimidating and violent. They have to. Being the scariest dealer, you don't get informed on. They must be honest in recognising that this development is a direct result of the police pursuing these children. The more you try and clamp down on the drug problem, the more violence will escalate. This is the reality we're seeing on our streets. Indeed, the Home Office's own 2010 drug strategy recognises the unintended consequences of enforcement. I find myself in complete agreement with former undercover drugs detective Neil Woods, chairman of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition UK, when Neil said, "How do people think these kids get recruited? Do people imagine that they just randomly approached by a dealer or cold called asking them if they fancy a life of crime? They are recruited through the cannabis market, with the most promising youths being recruited for a county line dealing heroin and crack. By regulating the market, we separate the link between organised crime and teenage consumers." What Neil Woods clearly understands is that simply disrupting the supply chain is not enough. A drugs market in flux is a drug market of aggressive competition, where violence and intimidation will be more commonplace as competing interests to maximise more lucrative profits. Expendable young people who are enslaved within this system will not benefit from even more violence and turbulent circumstances. Neither are we helping children caught up in county lines by employing them as so-called child spies. This practice casts moral ambiguity upon the UK government at a time when they are criticising the exploitation being carried out by others. I am at a loss to see how we can reconcile the UK government's responsibilities to protect minors while simultaneously exposing them to abuse rings for the sake of intelligence gathering. Do we fully understand the long-term physical and mental ramifications of using young people in this way? Is there a clear code of practice on how children's welfare is protected while working with police or security services? How does an authorising officer weigh the intelligence benefits against the potential impact on the juvenile source? The report published by the House of Lords Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee suggests that the UK Government does not have satisfactory answers to these questions. I'm encouraged that the Scottish Government has a different approach in combating violent crime. As was mentioned earlier, there's 137 murders in Scotland, a peak which prompted the formation of the Violence Reduction Unit, or the VRU. By taking a public health approach to violence, the VRU and Scottish Government have made significant headway in preventing these crimes from happening. Instead of young offenders being driven into prisons, they're offered an alternative: training, mentoring and employment opportunities, therefore breaking the cycle of reoffending. Since 2007, violent crime has almost halved in Scotland, and crimes involving a weapon are down by 2/3. This didn't happen by accident. Likewise, I'd like to see our drug problem reclassified as a public health issue and regulated, as I mentioned earlier. If we were to take this road, the burden on law enforcement and the NHS would be reduced, and the saved funding could instead be invested in treatment, rehabilitation and harm reduction. I believe that by taking the approach I've highlighted today on violent crime and drug addiction, we can make significant strides against county lines. We shouldn't be handing this market to violent criminals, and we shouldn't allow the economic conditions to exist that incentivise gangs to exploit children. Legalise and regulate. That will put the government in control and ensure that illegal exploitation of children will be drastically reduced. And finally, Mr Evans, I'd like to put on record my appreciation for the work of Transform, Leap UK, Release and Anyone's Child, who continue to produce invaluable research on this subject.
Can I
congratulate the Honourable Lady and dear friend for West Ham for bringing forward this debate and say what an absolute pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Evans. Over the summer, the Metropolitan Police launched their 100th murder investigation. But this is not just a London problem. In towns and cities all over the UK, the dynamic of crime is changing, and the necessity to change attitudes to policing has never been greater. County lines is a devastating crime tsunami. I have seen firsthand in my own city where the excellent South Wales Police are fighting, in many cases, an invisible enemy, faceless in appearance but devastating in action. Last Thursday, I spent the evening with a Safer Wales outreach bus on the streets of Swansea who do work with victims of prostitution. And there I heard of 2 young ladies, age would be disputable, who'd gone missing, assumed to be taken by drug gangs, county lines, because of debt. I heard that they were likely to be trafficked, but when it was explained to me what punishment they could expect, it is too dreadful to repeat in this place. That is the reality of what we are facing. We are losing cities and towns up and down the country to the devastating phenomenon of county lines. Drugs, trafficking, prostitution and community devastation are the dreadful consequences of this life-sucking social cancer. They are taking our children's lives, both metaphorically and literally. And we must stop thinking that the current police numbers and the availability of social and community work is adequate. The level of support, training and government intervention this government needs to be providing is far below what is needed. Serious crime is threatening to overwhelm our communities, and whilst I acknowledge the government is trying, it is really time to try harder. The number of children aged between 10 and 15 being treated for stab wounds has increased by 69% since 2013. More than half the crimes against children from that same age group are related to violence. And at the centre of these rises are tragedies we should never forget. There are far too many young lives being senselessly lost. The Children's Commissioner has shown that a total of 70,000 youths aged up to 25 are feared to be part of the gang network. That's too many lives being wasted, too many families being destroyed, too many communities being devastated. The current surge in serious violence is a textbook definition of a whole system failure, which is something that ministers must acknowledge. These children are the victims of austerity and rising poverty, and the figures tell their own story. 120,000 children are homeless. Over 70,000 children are in care. Many thousands excluded from school. The consequences for many hundreds of families is total devastation. Vital services are being pared back as a result of local authority cuts, meaning that when families arrive into the system, they are there when they're already at crisis point. Violent crime has more than doubled in the last 5 years. It's now at record levels. Last year alone, offences involving firearms increased by 11%, while those involving drugs and sharp instruments increased by double that. I could regale you of examples from London, the Midlands, Yorkshire, Wales, in fact from anywhere in this country. And despite the stories I could tell, the Ending Gang Violence and Exploitation Fund, part of the Serious Violence Strategy, will be just £300,000. Hardly a commitment to tackle the reality of a serious crime wave that is currently engulfing our towns and cities. So I urge the government to invest more into the battle fund and to meet this war, because it is a war, head on. We cannot have any more families devastated. We cannot have any more lives lost. The time has passed for talking. We now need to be fighting to protect our families, to protect our communities, and to protect our children. It's time for this government to invest the appropriate time and the appropriate resources to tackle this demon head on.
sufficient time for Lynn Brown to sum up at the end of the debate. Ben Wallace.
Thank you, Mr Evans. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. If I may just start by, first of all, thanking the Honourable Member for West Ham actually for bringing this debate. I take it incredibly seriously, as do my colleagues, and as the Security Minister, my portfolio covers everything from what we've just seen in the Chamber, the GRU and counter-espionage and counter-terrorism. But the part of my portfolio that scares me the most, that I know I will see in my neighbourhood and my friend's neighbourhood and in my child's school, is serious and organised crime. You have to be very unlucky to be a victim of terrorism. You have to be even more unlucky to be a victim of a counter-espionage event. But the scale of organised crime, the recent, in the last few years, empowerment of those networks pose a real threat to not only our young people, and our young people of all classes. The grooming nature of it, the use of drugs, growth, the fueling of it poses a threat to all our communities. The county lines has enabled crime to be exported into large parts of the United Kingdom that never had the violent crime, never had serious and organized crime. They might have had the local dealer or the local burglar, but they have never had the type of organised violence that is now wreaking havoc on those streets. I hear my honourable colleague, gentleman, the member for Gedling, who over the years we have known, he too was a Home Office Minister in 2008, I think, to do it. And what he said actually is incredibly pertinent to this issue. And he said about the well-crafted speech and everything else, and as ever I will horrify my officials by not reading my well-crafted speech or quoting endless facts about Fund Y and Fund B. I've been in this House long enough to know and listen to other governments from opposition side about the list of funds, and I'm happy to write to the honourable members with the list of funds around the communities. But his point is absolutely right, that to fix this problem is going to be about driving together that integration, both horizontally and vertically. The integration of the community, of the local authority response, of the healthcare response, of the voluntary response, with the vertical driving together of local policing, regional policing through the regional organised crime units, and national policing, in order that we get some of the very serious gangsters at the top, and bringing to bear the weight of the state where we can to weaken them. And that is going to be driven not often by the experts, because the experts know what to do. They're just all in different buildings and in different parts of government. It takes a ministerial drive, and here is a weakness, and I'd be interested if the Honourable Member for Gedling agrees, but one of the weaknesses in our system is the length of time we are ministers to drive that system. 1 year in the Home Office, I've done this for 2 years. I happen to have a background in counter-terrorism, going through all those lessons we did in counter-terrorism in the early 90s, of sharing intelligence, making sure we tackle permissive communities or supporting communities, distancing terrorists from that support base. I happen to start at a run, but I'm here for 2 years, and who knows how long it will be. One of our systems is that strength to drive through, knock heads together, to box clever within Whitehall, which is a challenge. How do I get the DCLG or I forget the new name, it's too long now, but an H in front of it. How do I get DCLG or the Cabinet Office, or how do I lobby the Chief Secretary of the Treasury that this needs to be done? How do I say, because it's, we can sit here and talk about cuts and I can talk about debt, but it's also about priorities. If you're on this side of the House, you too will be having a discussion about what are your priorities, where are you going to spend it. It's about that priorities. And that means that we have to have some stability in this. And the great thing about the work the Honourable Lady for West Ham has done is it is more collaborative, this approach. The way she has gone about, Mr Evans, tackling and highlighting the threat of county lines is an example to us all. Because actually, we are all trying to find a solution collectively, both locally and nationally. And if I may, I will address her points rather than the other members because of the short period of time and the way she set out very eloquently her asks and her points. If I say, first of all, social media and communication, and there's a bit of an ask in this from me. What has accelerated county lines? What has really gripped? Because organised crime has existed for many years. Violence in some pockets has existed. What has accelerated it has been social media and secure communication, a la carte drugs buying by people who are posted. Sometimes they are groomed and abused, sometimes they are willing, and they go up into these towns, they go up into other boroughs, and people order a la carte through WhatsApp, through Instagram, drugs. That is communicated safely, end-to-end encryption, to the drug barons, to the drug buyers. You can buy anything. And if you want to see an incredibly good documentary by a girl called Stacey Dooley on BBC, which is about kids buying drugs, it brings it home. She went to WhatsApp to show the research, and they wouldn't even answer the door to her. So one of the sort of the fuel on the fire has been this safe environment. My ask in that, I don't have time to give away. One of the asks in that for all colleagues is when we come to this house, and I remember Labour brought Ripper, which is actually where you brought forward, where the Labour Party brought forward youth chiz, wasn't a Conservative thing. It's been going on since 1999. When I was in Scottish Parliament, the SNP didn't oppose it either. So chiz, using young people as chiz, has been around for many years. When we bring legislation to this House to try and seek ways into that technology, there is often a knee-jerk reaction from the likes of Liberty, and too many people go along with it. It is absolutely vital if we are to get into the top of those drug gangs and to find out what's there going on. There was a cartel arrested in Glasgow, I think last year. He had military-grade encryption to order directly from the cartels in Central America. He even distributed it to the cartels and then distributed it back into Glasgow. We have to tackle that because that has been part of the fuel. We also have to tackle, quite rightly, the point about education. What do we spot? The cuckooing, vulnerable people, getting local areas, especially the leafy suburbs, who've never seen this, who don't know that that young person who suddenly appeared in a flat is actually the victim of trafficking. Human trafficking leaks into this. These nail bars up and down the country, often manned by Vietnamese who only take cash. 99% of the time, those people are trafficked. But everyone still goes in middle-class areas and get their nails done. No one says, well, they're going to order here. In plain sight. And we are working with our local authorities, and the regional organised crime units are working with them to help improve spotting the signs to do that. The violent reduction crime. In Glasgow is a really interesting project, and I asked my officials to go and see it, about how they have reduced knife crime, even in environments, and we can argue, you know, I don't pretend there hasn't been cuts to police. Even where there were falling police numbers in Glasgow, they reduced massively the knife crime incidences, which shows actually better working together can actually sometimes make a really significant difference, and they have done some great work in the Scottish Government at tackling that. And I think that is really important. But it leaks into the wider grooming piece, exactly that. I see it in Prevent, I see it in counter-terrorism. It's the same method. Whether it's for sexual exploitation, crime, whatever, it is in there. And we have to take the social media on. That is why we're consulting, including looking at regulating in this House. And if we can't regulate, I have, slightly gone freelance at one stage, talked about, well, the polluter could pay. If we're having to spend hundreds of millions of pounds on police, I think I know where I'll get that money, if that's what we might have to do. But they need to step up to the plate. There is the technology, and I think we can do more. And we really have to tackle that grooming and put people in that category of groomers. They're not glamorous. They're the same as paedophiles. They are dirty little rotten groomers who are sacrificing young people. And I saw a Merseyside operation, very successful, that was brilliantly done. And this goes back to how we're doing the pursue end, the organised crime end of tackling. As the member for West Ham said, I want to see the bad guys at the top get it. A brilliant operation done in Merseyside, where county lines were coming up into Lancashire. They went top and bottom, they worked the local authorities, and some really good police forces have something called local crime, organised crime panels. Mick Barton, the Chief Constable up in Durham, has used local authorities on a really regular basis, and on there is the Environment Agency, the local government, they've used where a whole load of government agencies are on this panel and saying, well, if we can't arrest them for X, we are going to make their life misery. We are going to do them for fly tipping. We are going to, and then we're going to publicly expose them, which is what is happening, and take the glamour off them. And that has had some really, really good results. Other areas could follow suit better. Some do and some don't. The bit about witness protection and trusted system, I totally agree. I worked in intelligence. If no one picks up the phone, you're flying blind. And actually, if no one picks up the phone with this secure communication, there is a point, doesn't matter how many neighbourhood policemen you have, or women, actually they're doing it in their bedrooms on secure comms. You need someone to pick up the phone and to trust it, and that is really, really important. We are going to, this year and next year, move witness protection away from the regions, as in not, it'll be administered in the regions, but it's going to be nationally coordinated as the National Crime Agency. But as a London MP, can I urge you this? The Met Police have not opted to do that. She could have a word, and this is about working with everyone else, with the Mayor of London to ask, actually, is that the right way to tackle it? And the county lines, some of the biggest exporters of county lines are London into the regions and Merseyside into the regions. I can say that, I'm Lancashire, right? You know, it's my home place. And between the two, we need to think with our mayors as well about how we can tackle some of that permissive society, because some of it is permissive. It is not just they're all victims. There is a hard edge, which is why we have to use, sometimes, youth as chiz. I can write to the Honourable Member with lots of safeguards that we put in place around that, risking. It's oversighted by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, Lord Justice Fulford, been in existence since 1999. Sometimes, and very rarely, we do it. We have to do it if we're to penetrate where this encryption is, and some of the county lines where they're not. It's something we don't want to do, but it is sometimes it is useful, and we have to do it. And I will definitely do that. But that is why we need to do it. On Ashley and Nathan, I will be delighted to take that case up. If we could have a meeting, I think it's outrageous how they have been treated. That is not the message we want to send, and I will do everything to make sure they are given the support they should be. I think it's outrageous. I had experience myself of settling people who actually were under threat of death if they got caught, and some of them were tragically killed. Finally, on the organisation to tackle the crime, the Honourable Member for Gedling and West Ham talk about what are we doing. What I would say is the figures, 128 tonnes of Class A drugs snatched last year, thousands of arrests by the NCA, 628 guns at the NCA. We have got a place over the last few years, like the contest strategy, started under Labour and has been refined and learnt by mixed states and driven into the fingertips of Britain, where we have the policing response, in my view, in the right place, where we have regional organised crime units, we have the National Crime Agency above that, and we have the local forces. And if you go and visit your local regional organised crime units, you will see that actually, collaboratively, they are bringing to bear some very, very good resource. And I'm very happy to facilitate that for whoever wants to go. The Met are not in the ROCU. They choose to do it separately. I have lots of faith the Met has the resource, and it does have much more considerable resource per head than us in Lancashire and Merseyside, but it does. There's a plus and a down to that, but it's well worth exploring with your minister, with the Mayor of London, whether he thinks that is the right apparatus. But the regional crime units can bring the specialists, the specialty surveillance, and often what we find in these county lines is they're crossing county borders and constabulary borders, and that's why these regional organised crime units work. My one in the northwest is based in Warrington. I shall be visiting it again regularly. I've been around all of them in the country, and they are extraordinary. And that's part of that is about gathering better intelligence, that the member of Gedling said, mapping organised crime groups. Individual forces have been pretty weak at finding a common denominator. So Cumbria claims to have more organised crime groups per head than apparently Merseyside or some other parts of the country. I think that's a bit different. So we've got to improve the intelligence. The NCA, and again, I'm happy to facilitate where we can visits to the NCA. The upskilling that's gone on there, the changes that we did through last year in terms of conditions to make them compete better, I think we are getting a much better capability, and we're starting to deliver purely intelligence-led, bringing to bear and collaborative working. I'm not deaf to neighbourhood policing. I'm not deaf to the cuts to the police. I know there have been cuts to police. I do not deny that. We can sit here and argue all day about why that's had to happen, whether our priorities are right. But I also recognise that we've got to do something about that, and we are going to try. But certainly it's about prevention as much as arrest. And that is true of so many crimes. You can't arrest your way out of it. Even this. I will not go down the long path of legalisation, but I will say that we have to keep empowering the local authorities. I will send honourable members the list of what we do in local authorities. And the one thing I do see from my desk in the Home Office, and the member for Gedling would have seen this, I see lots of people not bidding for funds. So I see funds, colleagues come and complain, understandably, and I say, but your force or your local authority didn't actually bid into it. And I'm very happy to share that with anyone if they come and say, well, you know, or you've seen the fund and no one's got it in your community and I can find out. And we'll go together and we'll go to Brighton and say, why didn't you bid for it? I mean, you can't everybody have it, but it's interesting that there are some who always bid and always get and some who never bid at all. So, Mr Evans, I'll sit down and let Honourable Member just finish. Thank you.
So first of all, Mr Evans, thank you so much, and thank you for the Minister for sitting down and giving me the opportunity of coming back quickly. Can I just say, I think it's been a really superb debate. Every single member that's spoken today has brought something special and unique, passionate about their communities and passionate about keeping their communities safe. And I think all of the contributions have been excellent. I want to thank the Minister for his response, and I don't often get a feeling of doing stuff like that, but I thought his response was particularly excellent. I thought his tone was right, and I am so grateful that he didn't read out the speech he was given. Can I take him up on all of the offers that he has made today, and I'd be happy to provide him with information about Ashley, etc. Can I say to him the problem that we have about funding is about the short-termism, and if we're asking people to ask for money, it is only for 15 months' work or 5 months' work, it's a problem.
Order.